Welcome to part 3 of Visions of the 21st Century. Our topic is the desert of the soul. We explore the loss of soul and ask if it can be reborn in the modern world. Can we find our meaning again in an animated cosmos? The myths of humanity show the loss and recovery of the soul as the fundamental spiritual myth. The talk explores how the soul has lost its meaning as we have moved from a primal to the modern world view. We give examples from Eastern practices and also from depth psychology in the West, where it is recovered and made central. Let us examine these themes in part 3 of Visions of the 21st Century. Hello, welcome to the third part of Visions of the 21st Century. In this we move to a radically different perspective. Instead of looking at the crisis of the 21st century simply materialistically, in terms of wars, economies, ecologies, divisions and political situations, we're going to look at the emerging metaphysics to see if a new view of consciousness is possible. And we shall end by looking at the possibility of an integrated human being. So we've moved radically to the spiritual area rather than just simply the materialist area in order to get an interdisciplinary perspective on this whole evolving crisis. Because there's also a crisis in our consciousness. There's also a desert in the soul. Some of these questions that we're taking in include, can we recover the meaning of consciousness? Can the destructive aspects of our nature be understood and transformed? Can we recover our soul, an animus mundi, the soul of the world, within a meaningful cosmos? And can we find a path of individuation, to use a term of Carl Jung, in the psyche? Can we transform, therefore, not just our political and economic systems, can we transform ourselves? And on a metaphysical level, can the cosmos be ensouled at a new level? Now, great examples in the West of pioneers who have attempted to create a new meaning for consciousness and a meaning for the soul in the new bottles, as it were, the old wine, remember? The old wisdom in the new bottles and the new containers that is required for the 20th and 21st centuries. We of course mention Jung, Carl Jung, as we've mentioned right throughout the Quest series, who provided not only a worldview, but a psychology, a depth psychology, and indeed an ethics. Because within the psyche, he discovered that there is an ethical foundation to it. There is a purposeful, meaningful development towards a higher self, towards an individuation process. We also have looked at other key thinkers in the realm of depth psychology, who have, as it were, plummeted into the depths of the psyche to see if there is a natural religious impulse inside, spiritual impulse inside human beings. Is there an autonomous, natural, spiritual impulse inside human beings? So if we look at the work of Stanislav Grof, for example, we can find that tracing back right into the birth process and even into the womb, the development of the child takes place in a transpersonal manner at the beginning of its life. That there is an archetypal foundation to the psyche, and that the experience of birth profoundly affects the infant, the baby, throughout the whole of their subsequent life. And when they recall it as an adult, they recall it in archetypal terms. It's as if the transpersonal and the archetypal surround us and surround consciousness at all levels. We also look at the continued growth of Eastern practices in the open competition of religions for the soul. The West, in its search for spiritual sustenance, has increasingly turned to the East. Some people have said, including Jung actually, that the Western man should not look for a deep incorporation of the East because, as it were, the West and the East are fundamentally different. However, the evidence of the past 30, 40 years is that increasing numbers of people have looked to the Eastern, their religions, like Buddhism, for example, and also the esoteric in terms of their mysticism, which is in the East often openly allowed and encouraged, has looked to these sources for spiritual understanding and growth, and have incorporated them into their practices in the West, yoga, meditation, of course, being famous examples. Now, we have incorporated in our Quest series, a meditation practice which many of us have carried out following the Secret of the Golden Flower. And it's an example of incorporation of Eastern practices. And in this meditative practice, which is explained in this ancient text, that the sources of Chinese understanding of the psyche, their spiritual understanding of the psyche, can be found in these texts. And the reason why we chose it is because this particular text and this meditation advice actually corresponds to a lot of what we've discovered, and certainly what I believe exists in the human psyche, that there exists not only darkness in the human psyche, but light. And this light circulates. And it's the circulation of the light, as if through the various chakras of the deep psyche, that this circulation of the light is the process of transformation and growth. And it's this circulation of the light meeting the darkness which leads to our growth. So there's an incorporation of the darkness and there's a meeting with the light, as explained in The Secret of the Golden Flower, and it's aided by meditation practices. So that is an example of how Eastern, Oriental, ancient wisdom can be attached and incorporated and integrated with the findings of depth psychology in the West. Now, there are 4 diagrams which you can see on the accompanying slides, which are taken from Richard Tarnas, who wrote that book we studied called The Passion of the Western Mind. He uses a simple diagrammatic explanation for what has happened to the soul, or the self, in ancient times as it moves into the modern world. And he portrays the self, or the soul, as an open system connected in a participation mystique with the rest of the nature and the world and the cosmos. In diagram 1, we see on the left-hand circle the self and the world both shaded. The self is permeable, and there is an influence from an animated world of archetypes, and the world of nature, and the world of which is alive, which is flowing into the self, and vice versa. On the right-hand side, we see the circle of the modern worldview, which shows that the self is the only area now which has the sense of meaning, and the rest of the world is deanimated. In the second diagram, we see on the left-hand side, again, the diagram of the self and the world in the primal worldview. The self has, as it were, been reduced, the area of significance and meaning. It's not so much that the circle of the self there is reduced, but the area of meaning, which is the total circle of the world, cosmos, nature, is reduced. And the world around it is deanimated. In the third diagram, we see the intermediary position, as it were, between the first two, where the relationship to the divine, or to God is conceived of as a extraplanetary force, as it were, above, and has the total area of significance to which the self is linked, while the world has again been deanimated, deprived of its previous significance and aliveness and luminosity. In the fourth diagram, we see that the primal worldview and the late modern worldview might be viewed as a reduction of the self to a tiny area of significance in a world which has become desouled, without meaning, or without its own inherent meaning. And the only sense of meaning is in this reduced sense of self. However, self is in this sense soul, might be thought of as big S, whereas the small s, or the sense of self-image or self-esteem, or the ego, has been expanded, so that in the modern world the ego has achieved a tremendous sense of illusory mastery, while the inner sense of self and meaning and soul has been reduced enormously. Instead of the self expanding, the self has become smaller. And that the human being and even our planet is seen as infinitesimally small in a vast, vast universe, which if we deprive of meaning by saying it's just an accident, or it's dead essentially, and life has emerged accidentally out of this universe, then it follows too that our consciousness has emerged accidentally. And therefore consciousness our true essence, is deprived of any sense of meaning. It's here by accident. So the self is reduced to a small area of meaning in a vast cosmos, which is there, as it were, by accident. So paradoxically, the more we've understood, the less important we are.